Blood stained the snow, and her lungs burned with every agonizing breath. Gwendolyn Croft had exactly 3 minutes before her Alpha's hunters tore her apart. But as she vaulted over a frozen ravine, she didn't hit the ground. She crashed into a wall of solid, shimmering silver fur. Gwendolyn Croft was not born to scrub the blood from the stone floors of the Red Pine Fortress. She was born the daughter of a respected beta, a woman with a proud lineage and a fierce spirit. But in the brutal, unforgiving medieval world of werewolf packs, bloodlines could be erased with the swipe of a broadsword. When her father challenged the tyrannical ascension of Alpha Cedric Lawson, the retaliation was swift and merciless. Her family was slaughtered, and at just 10 years old, Gwendolyn was stripped of her rank, cast down into the dirt, and forced into the grueling life of a Pack Omega. For 10 years, Gwendolyn survived by making herself invisible. The Red Pine Pack, nestled deep in the jagged, frostbitten peaks of the Jagged Tooth Mountains, was a place of iron and cruelty. Cedric Lawson ruled not through respect, but through unadulterated terror. He was a massive, scarred brute of a man who treated his pack members like expendable foot soldiers in his endless territorial skirmishes. Gwendolyn's days were a blur of backbreaking labor, starvation, and surviving the bitter, biting cold of the unheated barns. Because of her severe malnourishment and the sheer psychological trauma inflicted upon her daily, her inner wolf had retreated deep into her psyche. She had not shifted in years. To the rest of the pack, she was little better than a human slave, a broken plaything to be kicked whenever the hunt went poorly. The breaking point arrived on the eve of the winter solstice. The great hall was alight with roaring fires and the deafening cheers of drunk, aggressive wolves. Cedric sat upon his carved wooden seat, tearing meat from a bone, his eyes glassy with mead and malice. Beside him sat his enforcer, Tobias Miller, a sadistic, cold-eyed killer who had buried 3 previous mates before their 25th birthdays. As Gwendolyn served the ale, keeping her eyes glued to the grease-stained floorboards, Cedric's booming voice silenced the hall. "Tobias has served me well this winter," Cedric bellowed, wiping grease from his beard. "It is only fitting he is rewarded with a warm bed. Gwendolyn, you will bear his mark before the dawn." The hall erupted in laughter and howls of approval. Gwendolyn's blood turned to ice. She looked at Tobias, who was grinning, revealing stained, crooked teeth. He looked at her not with lust, but with the cold, calculating anticipation of a butcher eyeing a lamb. To be mated to Tobias was a death sentence. She would not survive the week. That night, as the pack descended into a drunken stupor, Gwendolyn made her choice. She had no provisions, no heavy furs, and no weapons. She had only the ragged woolen dress clinging to her frail frame and a desperate, burning will to live. She slipped through the kitchen's ladder, forcing open a rusted iron grate that led out into the snowy moat. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. The snow was already waist-deep, the wind howling through the skeletal branches of the ancient pines. She ran. Gwendolyn pushed her broken body past its limits, her bare feet sinking into the freezing snow, leaving small red blooms of blood with every step. The jagged rocks tore at her skin, but she couldn't feel the pain. Adrenaline and sheer primal terror fueled her. She knew she had to reach the Whispering Woods, a dense, ancient forest bordering their lands, steeped in dark legends. Red pine wolves rarely ventured there, believing it to be haunted by gods older than the pack itself. For 2 hours she ran in agonizing silence. Then she heard it. A long, piercing howl shattered the stillness of the night. It was followed by another and then another. They had discovered she was missing. Panic seized her throat. Gwendolyn scrambled up a steep embankment, her fingers digging into the frozen earth. Below her, in the valley she had just crossed, she saw the torches, 4 of them moving with terrifying speed. Tobias had brought the hunting party. "Little rabbit," Tobias's voice echoed through the thin mountain air. "You're only making the punishment worse." She didn't look back. Gwendolyn threw herself forward, tearing through the dense underbrush of the boundary line. Thorns ripped her dress and slashed her cheeks. Her chest heaved, every breath tasting like copper. Her legs were going numb. Her body was entering the final stages of hypothermia and exhaustion. She could hear the crunch of snow behind her. They had shifted into their wolf forms. The heavy, rhythmic thud of massive paws hitting the earth was closing in. The guttural snarls were right at her heels. Gwendalin burst through a thicket of dead ivy, finding herself at the edge of a frozen ravine. The gap was too wide for a malnourished girl to jump, and the drop below was a jagged moor of black rocks. 3 minutes, she thought, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. I have 3 minutes before they tear me to pieces. She closed her eyes, preferring the abyss to Tobias Miller. Taking a final desperate breath, Gwendalin leapt into the void. But she never hit the rocks. Instead of falling, she collided violently with a wall of solid, immense heat. The impact knocked the wind completely out of her. She bounced off something hard but covered in thick, coarse hair, tumbling into a snowbank. Gwendalin gasped for air, her vision blurring. She forced her eyes open, expecting to see Tobias standing over her. Instead, she was staring up at the most terrifying, magnificent creature she had ever seen. The wolf was colossal. It stood easily at the height of a warrior, its shoulders thick with muscle and power. But it was the fur that made Gwendolin's breath catch in her throat. It was not the muddy brown or dull gray of the red pine pack. It was a brilliant, shimmering silver, glowing almost ethereally in the pale moonlight. The beast turned its massive head, looking down at her. Its eyes were pools of molten amber, burning with an ancient, unfathomable intelligence. This was no ordinary werewolf. This was a Lykan of legend. Before Gwendalin could even scream, the sound of snapping branches drew the massive wolf's attention. Tobias and 3 other red pine hunters burst into the clearing, skidding to a halt. In their wolf forms, they were large and intimidating, but next to the silver giant, they looked like shivering pups. Tobias, a scarred brown wolf, bared his teeth. He let out a low, challenging growl, demanding the silver wolf step aside from his prey. It was a fatal miscalculation. The silver wolf did not growl back. It merely stood to its full, towering height and released a pulse of dominating aura so suffocatingly heavy that Gwendalin felt herself pressed flat against the snow. It was the pure, unfiltered power of a king. 2 of the red pine wolves immediately whined, dropping to their bellies and exposing their throats in absolute submission. But Tobias, blinded by arrogance and Cedric's orders, launched himself forward, aiming for the silver wolf's neck. It was over in a heartbeat. The silver wolf moved with blinding, fluid grace. It caught Tobias in midair, its massive jaws clamping down on the brown wolf's spine. A sickening crack echoed through the silent forest. The silver giant tossed Tobias's limp, lifeless body into the snow as effortlessly as a hound tossing a rat. The remaining 3 hunters didn't wait to see more. They scrambled backward, slipping on the ice in their terror, and bolted back toward red pine territory with their tails firmly tucked between their legs. The clearing fell silent once more, save for the whistling wind. The massive silver wolf slowly turned its amber eyes back to Gwendalin. She was paralyzed, her body shutting down from the cold, the trauma, and the sheer terror of the deity standing before her. The wolf leaned down, its hot breath washing over her frozen face. It didn't smell of blood or wet dog. It smelled of crisp pine, ozone, and power. Then the edges of Gwendolin's vision went black. She surrendered to the darkness. When Gwendalin opened her eyes, she expected to find herself in hell or, at the very least, back in the freezing barns of red pine. Instead, she felt heat, deep, comforting warmth. She was lying on a mattress so soft she thought she might be floating. Thick velvet blankets were pulled up to her chin. The scent of burning cedar and roasted herbs filled the air. She bolted upright, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. She was in a grand, cavernous chamber. High stone walls were draped with rich tapestries depicting ancient battles between men and beasts. A massive hearth crackled with a roaring fire. Her bloody rags were gone, replaced by a soft white linen chemise, and her wounds, her torn feet, and the scratches on her face had been carefully cleaned and bound in fresh bandages. "I wouldn't move too quickly if I were you. Your body has endured a century of punishment in a single night." Gwendalin flinched, pulling the blankets tighter around herself. Stepping out from the shadows of the room was a man. He was breathtakingly tall, with broad, commanding shoulders. His hair was a striking, rare silver, catching the firelight, and his eyes were the exact molten amber of the giant wolf in the forest. He wore dark, tailored leather and a heavy velvet cloak clasped at the shoulder with a solid silver insignia. A howling wolf wearing a crown. Gwendolin's heart stopped. She immediately recognized the crest. Everyone in the Northern Territories knew it, even the isolated Omegas of Red Pine. "Why, you're Caspian Northridge," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The Lykan King." Caspian stepped closer, his movements deliberate and silent. He stopped at the foot of her bed, looking down at her with an expression that was entirely unreadable. "I am," Caspian replied, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated in her chest. "And you are trespassing in my sovereign territory, little runaway." "I am sorry, Your Grace," Gwendolin stammered frantically, trying to bow her head while remaining buried in the blankets. "I was running from Cedric Lawson. I didn't know I had crossed the border. Please don't send me back. I'll work in your kitchens. I'll scrub your floors." "Quiet," Caspian commanded softly. It wasn't a threat, but it commanded absolute obedience. He walked around the bed, pulled up a heavy oak chair, and sat beside her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, bringing his face dangerously close to hers. Gwendolin held her breath, her eyes wide. "Cedric Lawson is a butcher who plays at being an alpha," Caspian said, his tone dripping with disdain. "I have tolerated his border skirmishes for too long. But that is not why I spared you. Nor is it why my physician spent the last 12 hours pulling you back from the brink of death." Gwendolin swallowed hard. "Then why?" Caspian reached out. Gwendolin flinched, but his hand was surprisingly gentle as he brushed a stray lock of hair away from her neck. His fingers traced the edge of a faint, crescent-shaped birthmark just below her ear. "Because," Caspian murmured, his amber eyes locking onto hers, "when my wolf touched you, I smelled something that Cedric Lawson has spent the last 10 years trying to bury. I smelled the bloodline of the true heirs of the Jagged Tooth Mountains." Gwendolin stared at him in disbelief. "What are you talking about? My father was just a beta. We were nobody." Caspian let out a dark, hollow chuckle. "That is the lie Cedric beat into you. Your father wasn't just a beta, Gwendolin. He was the brother of the previous alpha, the alpha Cedric murdered to steal the throne. You are not an Omega." Caspian stood up, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the bed. "You are the rightful alpha of the Red Pine Pack. And Cedric knows that as long as you draw breath, his claim is illegitimate. That is why he abused you. That is why he tried to mate you to his executioner. He wanted you broken or dead." The room seemed to spin. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her suffering, and her parents' deaths shattered into a million pieces. She wasn't just an abused runaway. She was a threat to a tyrant. I can't be," she whispered, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "Look at me. I'm broken. I can't even shift." Caspian leaned back, his gaze burning with intense, protective fury. "You are not broken," the Lykan King said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You were buried, and now you have been unearthed." He extended a large, calloused hand toward her. "You have a choice, Gwendolin Croft. You can stay in this keep, safe and hidden, and live out your days as a maid. Or you can take my hand. Allow me to heal you. Allow me to teach you how to be the queen you were born to be. And together, we will march on the Red Pine Fortress and burn Cedric Lawson's reign to the ground." Gwendolin looked at the king's hand, the silver crest on his cloak glinting in the firelight. She thought of the cold barns. She thought of Tobias's dead eyes. She thought of her father. Slowly, her trembling hand reached out from beneath the blankets, and she placed her palm in the hand of the Silver King. The healing of Gwendolyn Croft did not happen overnight. Trauma, especially a decade of physical and psychological torment, leaves deep roots that require agonizing patience to extract. For the first month, within the impregnable stone walls of Frostborn Castle, Gwendolyn barely spoke. She was placed under the direct care of Beatrice Hawthorne, an elderly but fiercely protective human physician whose family had served the Lykan Kings for generations. Under Beatrice's watchful eye, Gwendolyn was fed rich, nutrient-dense broths and roasted meats. Her shattered bones were reset, and her numerous scars were treated with rare botanical salves. Slowly, the hollow, starved Omega vanished, replaced by a young woman of striking, ethereal beauty. Gwendolyn's hair, once matted and dull, grew into thick, cascading waves of dark chestnut, and her pale skin regained a healthy, sun-kissed flush. But it was Caspian Northridge who truly began to heal her mind. The Lykan King was a terrifying figure to his enemies, a warlord of unmatched brutality on the battlefield. Yet with Gwendolyn, he exhibited a staggering, deliberate gentleness. He never pushed her. He never demanded her presence. Instead, he would sit in the massive library with her for hours in comfortable silence, reading ancient treatises on pack law and strategy while she watched the snowfall. When the night terrors inevitably came, plunging Gwendolyn back into the freezing barns of red pine, it was Caspian who would rush to her chambers. He wouldn't touch her without permission. He would simply sit at the foot of her bed, projecting his heavy, calming cedar and ozone scent until her erratic heartbeat slowed. "You are safe here, little bird," he would murmur in the darkness, his amber eyes glowing softly. "My walls are high and my fangs are sharp. No monster will cross this threshold." As winter melted into a brutal, muddy spring, Caspian began her training. He entrusted his master-at-arms, a grizzled veteran named Arthur Pendleton, to teach her defensive footwork. But Caspian personally instructed her on how to fight like a wolf. He taught her how to harness her suppressed anger, channeling the injustice of her past into a weapon of cold, calculated precision rather than blinding rage. Between the parries and the breathless sparring sessions in the courtyard, a spark ignited. Gwendolyn found herself drawn to the king's quiet strength, the way his gaze tracked her every movement, not as prey, but as an equal. The mating bond, suppressed by her trauma, was slowly unfurling in her chest, pulling her toward him. But peace in the Northern Territories was an illusion. The calm was shattered on a rainy afternoon when Arthur Pendleton rode through the courtyard gates. His horse lathered in sweat and blood. "Your Grace," Arthur bellowed, sliding from the saddle. "News from the Jagged Tooth Mountains. Cedric Lawson has mobilized the Red Pine Army. And worse, he has formed a blood pact with Alpha Garrett Fletcher of the Ironclad Pack." Caspian's jaw tightened. "Fletcher is a mercenary. What did Cedric offer him to risk a war with me?" "A lie, Your Grace," Arthur said grimly. "Cedric has spread word across the Southern Territories that the Lykan King has kidnapped a defenseless Red Pine Omega for his own cruel amusement. He is using your abduction of Gwendolyn as a martyr's rallying cry. They are marching on our southern border." Gwendolyn, who had been listening from the armory steps, felt the blood drain from her face. "It's my fault," she thought, the old panic clawing at her throat. "Because of me, innocent wolves are going to die. I have to go back," Gwendolyn whispered, her voice trembling. She stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. "Caspian, I must turn myself in. If I surrender, he will call off Fletcher's army." Caspian turned to her, his expression a thunderous mask of pure royal fury. "You will do no such thing. You cannot go to war for me," she cried, the emotional dam finally breaking. "I am just one girl. I am not worth the blood of your soldiers." "You are a queen," Caspian roared. The sheer volume of his alpha command shook the very stones of the courtyard. The shock of his shout hit Gwendolyn like a physical strike. But instead of cowering, instead of shrinking away like the broken Omega she used to be, something deep inside her finally snapped. The decade of suppression, the terror, the grief over her slaughtered family, and the profound, overwhelming urge to protect the man who had saved her collided in a violently explosive catalyst. A searing, blinding pain ripped through her spine. Gwendolin fell to her knees, screaming as the sound of snapping bones echoed through the rain-soaked courtyard. Beatrice rushed forward, but Caspian threw out an arm, stopping her. "Do not touch her," he commanded, his eyes wide with awe. "She is breaking the seal." Gwendolin's agonizing screams morphed into a guttural, earth-shattering snarl. Dark fur burst from her skin, her limbs elongating with terrifying speed and power. The transformation was agonizing. A decade of unnatural suppression violently unspooled in seconds. When the shifting was complete, absolute silence fell over the courtyard. Standing where the frail girl had been was a wolf of monstrous proportions. She was nearly as large as Caspian's silver lichen form, but her fur was a breathtaking fiery auburn, thick and coarse, glowing like burning embers in the gray rain. Her eyes, once a soft hazel, were now a piercing, dominant gold. Gwendolin shook her massive head, letting out a deafening, echoing howl that vibrated with the undeniable, ancient authority of a pure-blood alpha. Caspian did not command her to kneel. Instead, the Lykan King walked slowly toward the magnificent auburn beast, dropped to one knee in the mud, and bowed his head in absolute reverence. "My queen," Caspian said softly, "your army awaits your command." The valley separating the Lykan territories from the jagged Tooth Mountains was a bleak expanse of jagged rocks and dying grass. The storm had not broken. Thunder rolled ominously across the bruised sky as the two opposing forces met. On one side stood the combined forces of Red Pine and Ironclad, hundreds of snarling, restless wolves driven by greed and Cedric Lawson's toxic pride. Cedric stood at the forefront in his human form, clad in heavy chain mail, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Beside him was Garrett Fletcher, looking impatient and hungry for slaughter. On the opposite ridge stood the Lykan vanguard. Caspian's elite guard, clad in obsidian armor, stood in perfect, terrifying silence. Cedric stepped forward, projecting his voice across the valley. "Caspian Northridge, you have violated the ancient treaties. Return my property to me. Pay the blood tithe, and I may convince my allies to spare your wretched castle." From the center of the Lykan ranks, a massive silver wolf stepped forward, its amber eyes burning with silent mockery. It did not shift. It did not answer. Instead, the ranks of the Lykan guard parted. Gwendolin Croft walked out onto the ridge. She did not wear the rags of an Omega. She wore beautifully forged, lightweight steel armor over a deep crimson tunic, her dark chestnut hair braided tightly against her skull. She carried no shield, only a long, elegantly curved broadsword strapped to her hip. A ripple of confusion ran through the Red Pine ranks. Cedric's smirk faltered. "Cedric Lawson." Gwendolin's voice rang out, magically amplified by the sheer commanding aura she now projected. It was a voice that did not tremble. "You demand your property. I am here." Cedric's eyes widened in genuine shock. "Gwendolin? What trickery is this? Get down here, you worthless cur, before I have Fletcher's men drag you by your hair." "You will drag no one," Gwendolin replied coldly, drawing her broadsword with a smooth metallic shing. "I am Gwendolin Croft, daughter of Beta Thomas Croft, niece of Alpha William Croft, and I stand before you not as a captive, but as the rightful bloodline, Alpha of the Red Pine Pack." A collective gasp echoed through the Red Pine wolves. Whispers broke out. The older wolves recognized the resemblance, the fiery spirit of her murdered uncle that Cedric had tried so desperately to extinguish. "Treason!" Cedric screamed, his face turning a mottled purple. "She is a liar. Kill her. Kill them all." Before Fletcher's mercenaries could surge forward, Gwendolin drove the tip of her sword into the dirt. "I invoke the right of ancestral combat," she roared, the ancient words imbued with so much raw lupin power that several of the weaker Red Pine wolves involuntarily dropped to their knees. One against one. The usurper against the heir for the throne of Red Pine. Silence descended like a suffocating blanket. By invoking the ancient right, Gwendolin had trapped him. If Cedric refused, The pack magic would automatically sever his alpha bond, rendering him a lone wolf and stripping him of all power. He had no choice. "You foolish, arrogant little bitch," Cedric spat, drawing a massive two-handed battle axe from his back. "I should have snapped your neck the night I killed your father. Come and try," she whispered. Cedric charged. He was a mountain of muscle fueled by desperation and rage. He swung the heavy axe in a brutal, sweeping arc meant to cleave her in two. Gwendalin didn't try to block it. Channeling the footwork Arthur Pendleton had drilled into her, she pivoted sharply on her heel. The heavy blade whistled past her face, missing by inches. Before Cedric could recover his balance from the missed swing, Gwendalin struck. She moved with the fluid, blinding speed of an apex predator. Her sword slashed upward, severing the tendons in Cedric's right wrist. He howled in agony, dropping the axe. Panicking, Cedric began to shift, his bones cracking as he desperately tried to summon his massive brown wolf. But Gwendalin was faster. With a fierce, guttural battle cry, she launched herself into the air, her own shift initiating mid-leap. By the time she hit him, she was the towering, fiery auburn wolf. The impact sounded like a cannon blast. Gwendalin's sheer mass threw Cedric backward, his half-shifted form crashing violently into the rocky earth. She pinned him down with her massive paws, crushing his chest, her razor-sharp teeth sinking deep into his shoulder, pinning him to the ground. Cedric gasped, choking on his own blood. The brown wolf beneath her whimpered pitifully, his eyes wide with the realization that he was entirely outmatched. Gwendalin stared down at the monster who had murdered her family, starved her, and tried to break her spirit. She could end him. She could rip his throat out and let his blood water the barren valley. But as she looked up, she saw the Red Pine Pack watching her. If she butchered him mercilessly, she would rule through fear just as he had. She was better than him. She was a true queen. With a sickening crunch, Gwendalin bit down hard enough to permanently shatter Cedric's shoulder joint, ensuring he would never wield a weapon or lead a hunt again. Then she released him. She stepped back, tossing her magnificent auburn head, and let out a triumphant, earth-shaking howl of victory. The valley was silent for a long moment. Then an older red pine wolf stepped forward, shifting into his human form. He fell to his knees and bared his neck. "All hail the true alpha," he choked out, tears streaming down his scarred face. One by one, the Red Pine Pack dropped to their knees. Even Garrett Fletcher, realizing the tide had turned and his contract was worthless, signaled his mercenaries to stand down and bow their heads in respect. A heavy, rhythmic thud echoed from the ridge. The massive silver wolf bounded down the rocky slope, shifting into Caspian Northridge before he reached her. Gwendalin shifted back, standing tall in her crimson and steel. Caspian walked up to her, his chest heaving, his amber eyes burning with intense, fierce pride. He didn't care about the armies watching them. He reached out his large hands, cupping her face, and pulled her into a deep, desperate and passionate kiss. The mating bond snapped firmly into place, a roaring fire of devotion and power linking their souls. She had run from hell as a broken slave, but Gwendalin Croft was returning home as a queen, with the most powerful king in the world standing forever by her side. If Gwendalin's breathtaking journey from a broken, terrified runaway to a fierce and unstoppable alpha queen sent shivers down your spine, you won't want to miss our next epic werewolf romance. Hit that like button to show your support for the true alpha of Red Pine. Share this incredible story of vengeance and love with your friends. And make sure to subscribe to our channel for more heart-pounding, dramatic tales of fantasy and fate. Your next great adventure is just one click away.